The Apache woman who entered my barn and woke up in my bed. The air was cool, carrying the scent of hay, soil, and the faint aroma of the pine trees surrounding his property. He had been working all day, repairing fences, feeding the animals, and fixing a section of the old barn roof that had started leaking after last week's storm. By the time he finished, the sky had darkened into a soft navy, and the first stars had begun to shine faintly. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and leaned against the barn door for a moment, taking in the stillness. Usually this was his favorite time of day, when the world seemed to pause and he could breathe without thinking of chores or schedules. But tonight, there was an unusual silence. The usual sounds, the crickets chirping, the occasional rustle of a raccoon in the yard, the low hum of the cows in the barn, were all quiet. Even the wind had softened, barely moving the branches. John felt a shiver crawl up his spine, though he told himself it was just the chill of the evening. He turned to shut the barn door and caught a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. At first he thought it might be one of the barn cats, a black shape slipping between the shadows, but then he realized it was something else. Something, or someone, was standing near the doorway. He froze for a moment, unsure if he should call out. His farm had been peaceful for years, far away from the small town where he had grown up. Encounters with strangers were rare. People rarely came this far without a reason. And yet there she was, a woman, standing under the dim light of the barn, silent and still. Her hair was long, dark, and slightly tangled. Her clothing was worn, patched in several places, as if she had been traveling for a long time or had no permanent home. Her eyes, dark and wide, looked at him with a mix of fear and caution. John's first instinct was to ask if she needed help, but his voice caught in his throat. He had no idea who she was or why she had appeared on his property. What if she was dangerous? He shook the thought away quickly, scolding himself. He had lived alone for years, and he knew the value of kindness. This woman was clearly in trouble. He could see it in the way her shoulders trembled, in the way she avoided looking directly at him. She was scared, and she needed help. He took a cautious step forward, keeping his hands visible, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice steady but gentle. The woman didn't respond at first. She only looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the evening. Then slowly she shook her head. Her movement was small, almost fragile, and she glanced toward the sky, then back at him. It was clear she was trying to communicate something, but the meaning was lost to John. He noticed small cuts on her arms and dirt smudges on her face. She was tired, hungry, alone. John decided he had to do something. He stepped fully into the barn, letting the door creak behind him. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I won't hurt you. You can stay here." The woman's eyes flicked to the door, then back to him. She hesitated, as if deciding whether she could trust him. Finally, with a small nod, she moved toward the corner of the barn where the hay was stacked. John went over and pulled a clean blanket from a shelf. "Here," he said, holding it out. "You can sit on this, it's warm." She accepted the blanket silently, wrapping it around herself like it was a shield. Her hands shook as she held it close to her chest. John could see the relief in her expression, the tiny easing of tension in her shoulders. He felt a strange mix of emotions himself, curiosity, concern, and a hint of awe. There was something about her presence that felt unusual, almost otherworldly, yet human in its vulnerability. John moved quietly around the barn, gathering some apples and a bottle of water from a small storage box. He handed them to her. "Eat something," he said gently. "You must be hungry." The woman looked at the food for a long moment before taking an apple with delicate fingers. She bit into it carefully, as if testing whether it was safe. Then she began to eat slowly, savoring each bite. John watched her, noting the way her eyes darted to the barn door every so often, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. He understood that fear. He had felt it before, though never so deeply. After a few minutes, she set the apple down and exhaled slowly, a tiny sound of relief escaping her lips. She glanced around the barn, taking in the hay, the tools, the faint smell of oil and wood. John could see her curiosity rising despite her caution. She seemed to be trying to understand where she was, why she was there, and whether this strange man was someone she could trust. John decided to sit on a hay bale nearby. He didn't want to crowd her or make her feel trapped. He simply watched, offering a calm presence. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," he said. "Just rest for a while, you're safe here." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The barn was quiet, save for the occasional sound of the wind brushing against the walls and the soft rustle of the hay as she shifted. John wondered about her life, how she had come to be standing in his barn that evening, and what stories her eyes held. He sensed strength in her, a resilience forged from hardship, even if it was hidden beneath her fear. As darkness fully settled, John lit a small lantern, placing it on a shelf so that the warm glow filled the corner where she sat. She looked at it briefly, then back at him, her expression softening. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first bridge between them. In that quiet moment, the barn was no longer just a shelter for animals and tools. It had become a safe place for a human in need. Hours passed. John finished a few minor chores but kept checking on her, making sure she was comfortable. He noticed her breathing slowly even out, her body relaxing under the blanket. She had started to trust, even if just a little. John felt a mixture of relief and caution. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he could not turn her away. Not now, not when she had nowhere else to go. As he stepped outside to close the barn door fully, he looked back once. The lantern's glow highlighted her silhouette, fragile yet unbroken. He realized that tonight, his farm had become a crossroads of two very different lives. His steady, predictable existence and hers. A life shaped by uncertainty, survival, and mystery. Neither knew what the future held, but for now, in that quiet barn under the vast night sky, there was safety, and there was trust forming in the most unexpected way. John returned to the barn one last time before bed, sitting on the floor a few feet from her. "You can sleep here for as long as you need," he said softly. She gave him a faint nod, her eyes closing slowly. The barn smelled of hay, wood, and the faint scent of her hair, carrying a strange comfort. For the first time in many nights, she allowed herself to rest, and John, watching over her silently, felt the weight of the day's unusual events settle into a quiet, uneasy peace. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the sense that something unusual had begun. A story neither of them could have predicted, born in the stillness of a farm under the evening sky. John knew that tomorrow would bring questions, perhaps challenges, but tonight was a night for calm, for trust, and for the strange connection that had begun in his barn. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over John's farm, spilling golden light across the fields and waking the animals with its warmth. John had been up for a while, tending to the cows and chickens, but he kept glancing toward the barn, curious and anxious to see the woman who had appeared the night before. He had left her resting under the soft glow of the lantern, and now he wondered if she had stayed there all night. When he finally entered the barn, he found it empty. For a moment, panic gripped him. Had she run away in the night? Was she hurt? But then he heard a faint sound, a soft shuffle from above. His heart skipped a beat as he moved carefully up the narrow wooden stairs to the loft of the barn. There she was, sitting quietly on a bale of hay, staring out the small window at the bright morning sky. She was awake, but she didn't seem startled by his presence. Her eyes, dark and deep, reflected a mixture of caution and relief. John paused, realizing how delicate this moment was. He didn't want to scare her, not after the night she had spent alone and weary. "Good morning," he said softly, keeping his voice calm. "I thought I'd check on you. Did you sleep well?" The woman tilted her head slightly, considering him. She shook her head slowly, then nodded faintly, as if trying to communicate that sleep had come in fragments but she had rested. Her hands were folded over her knees, her posture both wary and cautious. John could see faint bruises forming under her sleeves, remnants of a journey that had been harsh and unforgiving. He moved closer and sat on a bale of hay beside her, giving her space but making sure she didn't feel alone. "You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to," he said gently. "But if you're hungry, I have some breakfast ready in the house. I can bring it here if you want to stay in the barn." Her eyes flicked toward the stairs, then back to him. Slowly she nodded, indicating that she would like him to bring the food. John rose carefully, descended the stairs, and went to the small kitchen in his farmhouse. He prepared some simple food: bread, eggs, a little cheese, and a cup of warm tea. He put it all on a tray, careful to keep the aroma inviting but not overwhelming. Returning to the barn, he placed the tray gently on a flat section of the hay bale near her. "Here," he said, "take your time. Eat as much as you want." She looked at the food for a long moment, then lifted her hands and carefully took a piece of bread. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost cautious, as if she had been starving but didn't trust food easily. John watched silently, noticing how her hands shook slightly. She tore the bread into small pieces, eating each bite slowly. When she drank the tea, she held the cup with both hands, savoring the warmth as though it were more than just a drink. It was a comfort, a sign that she was safe. As she ate, John tried to strike up a gentle conversation, careful not to overwhelm her. "Where are you from?" he asked softly. She paused, looking down at the hay, then shook her head. He could tell she wasn't ready to talk about that yet. "That's okay," he said. "You can tell me when you're ready. There's no rush." The woman's eyes met his briefly, and for the first time, John saw something like a flicker of trust. She gestured slightly with her hands, pointing to the open sky and then toward the barn door. He nodded, understanding that she was trying to explain that she had been traveling, maybe escaping something. He didn't press her for details. He only offered his presence and the warmth of the barn. After a while, she finished eating. John carefully removed the tray and washed the dishes, returning them to the kitchen. When he came back, she had moved closer to the center of the loft, sitting with her knees drawn up. She seemed calmer, though still alert. John realized that this woman, whoever she was, had endured things most people couldn't imagine. Her strength was hidden beneath her quiet demeanor, and her eyes told stories that words could not capture. The morning passed slowly. John tended to his chores, but he kept glancing at her, wondering what her next move would be. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't complain. She simply sat and observed, taking in the barn, the animals, and the gentle hum of life around her. John found himself respecting her silence. It was her way of processing, of understanding that she had arrived in a strange place and that she could be safe here if she wanted. Eventually, she moved closer to the edge of the loft, peering down at the barn floor. John descended carefully to meet her gaze. "If you want," he said softly, "you can help me feed the animals. It's simple work and it might help you feel more comfortable here." She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Her movements were cautious as she followed him to the cows. John handed her a bucket of feed, showing her how to scatter it on the ground. She did it slowly, watching the animals carefully, learning their behavior. John noticed how precise her movements were, as if she had experience with animals or had spent time in nature. There was a quiet dignity in the way she handled each task, a respect for the animals that reminded John of the way his own mother had taught him to treat living creatures. As they worked together, the silence between them became comfortable. John realized that trust didn't always need words. In this shared space, with the gentle sounds of animals and the warm sunlight filtering through the barn windows, a quiet bond was forming. The woman began to relax slightly, her shoulders lowering, her breathing evening out. After the chores, John suggested a break. They sat together on a bale of hay, looking out at the fields. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked gently. The woman shook her head. She didn't speak the words, but the gesture was clear. She had nowhere safe to go yet. John nodded, understanding. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Her trust was earned slowly, step by step, not forced by questions. Throughout the morning, John observed little details about her. How she brushed a strand of hair from her face, the way her eyes followed the birds outside, the subtle way she seemed to notice everything but say nothing. Each movement told a story, a silent narrative of survival, caution, and quiet resilience. He admired her courage, even if he didn't yet understand the full depth of her experiences. By midday, she had moved to a corner of the barn where the sunlight streamed in. She stretched slowly, enjoying the warmth, and John noticed a faint smile tugging at her lips. It was the first smile he had seen. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried a sense of relief, a sign that she was beginning to feel safe. John felt a wave of satisfaction mixed with concern. He didn't know what had brought her here, but he knew she needed time, patience, and care. As the hours passed, John tried to engage her gently, offering small tasks and opportunities to interact. She followed his instructions, her movements careful but confident. She cleaned part of the barn, arranged some tools, and even helped sweep the floor. With each action, she seemed to reclaim a little piece of agency, showing that despite everything, she was capable, strong, and willing to survive. By late afternoon, the light had softened again, and John realized it was time to prepare dinner. He invited her to come inside, but she shook her head, choosing instead to remain in the barn where she felt secure. John respected her choice. He brought a plate of food to her, placing it gently on the hay. She ate in silence, occasionally glancing up at him with those deep, expressive eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, John lit a small lantern in the barn. The warm glow reflected in her eyes, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. She looked at him, not with fear but with curiosity and trust. John realized that the night would come, and with it the same uncertainty as before. But tonight there was a difference. She had begun to accept that this place could be safe, that this man could be trusted. Before leaving for the night, John approached her one last time. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said gently. "No one will disturb you. You're safe." She nodded slightly, wrapping herself in the blanket he had given her the previous night. Her eyes closed slowly, and John could see her breathing even out. She had survived another day, not just surviving physically, but beginning to feel some sense of security. John stepped outside, looking up at the sky. The stars were bright, and the moon cast a gentle light over the fields. He thought about the woman, her courage, and the mysterious way she had entered his life. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, or what stories she carried with her, but he knew one thing. Tonight, the barn was not just a shelter. It was a place where trust had begun to grow, where a stranger had found a moment of safety, and where a new chapter of life had quietly started. Morning came slowly, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. John had already begun his day, tending to the animals and checking the fences, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in his barn. He wondered how she had managed the night, whether she had felt safe, and what her next move would be. He knew she had survived a difficult journey to reach his farm, and though she hadn't spoken much, her presence carried a quiet strength that both intrigued and humbled him. When he approached the barn, he noticed movement at the loft window. She was awake, standing near the edge of the hayloft, gazing outside. Her dark hair caught the early sunlight, and for a moment she seemed almost like a figure from a painting, serene yet cautious. John called her softly, careful not to startle her. "Good morning." "Did you rest well?" The woman turned her head slowly. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened when she looked at him. She nodded faintly, indicating that she had slept, though probably not deeply. John could see the strain still in her posture, the subtle tension in her shoulders, and he knew that even a night of safety could not erase all the fear she carried. He stepped closer, lowering himself to sit on a bale of hay at a safe distance. "I'll get you something to eat," he said. "Do you want to come inside, or would you like me to bring it here?" She hesitated, glancing at the stairs, then back at him. Finally, she shook her head slightly, indicating she preferred to stay in the barn. John understood. The barn had become her safe space. It had the warmth of familiarity now, and she had begun to claim it as her own. He smiled softly, respecting her choice. He went inside the farmhouse and prepared a simple breakfast: eggs, bread, and a little cheese, along with a warm cup of tea. Carrying the tray back to the barn, he tried not to spill anything as he climbed the stairs to her loft. "Here," he said gently, placing the tray near her. "Take your time." She looked at the food, her hands hovering for a moment before she picked up a piece of bread. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like she was testing the world again, measuring safety with each action. John watched silently, noting the small signs of her vulnerability, the trembling of her hands, the careful way she sipped the tea, but also the quiet strength that shone through in her eyes. She had survived much, and yet she allowed herself to be nourished here, in a place that offered no judgment or harm. As she ate, John tried to talk softly, asking gentle questions about her journey, about the places she had seen, and about the life she had lived. She remained mostly silent, offering only small gestures or nods in response. Her silence wasn't cold, it was deliberate, a way to measure trust and observe her surroundings. John realized that patience was essential. He could not force words or answers from her, they would come when she was ready. After breakfast, John suggested helping with the animals again. "If you want," he said, "you can come with me. It might help you feel more at home." She considered him, then nodded quietly. Together, they fed the chickens, scattering grain carefully, and tended to the cows, checking for any signs of illness or discomfort. John observed her movements, noticing how instinctively she handled each task. There was a natural precision in her actions, a respect for the animals that spoke volumes about her character. She didn't speak, but her care and attention said more than words ever could. As they worked, John noticed something subtle change in her demeanor. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, her breathing evened out, and the tension in her eyes softened. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a silent communication that she was beginning to feel a little safer. The barn, once a place of uncertainty and fear, was now becoming a small haven. By midday, they returned to the barn loft, where she settled on a bale of hay. John sat nearby, careful to respect her space. "Do you want to tell me your name?" he asked gently. For a moment she seemed to consider it, then slowly shook her head. She wasn't ready. That was fine, John thought. Trust took time, and she had already shown courage by accepting his help and staying in his barn. He could wait. Instead, she gestured toward the barn door and the open fields beyond. John understood that she was pointing out the journey she had undertaken, perhaps hinting at the long distance she had traveled and the dangers she had faced along the way. He didn't press for details, only nodded in understanding. Words were not always necessary to convey empathy. The afternoon passed quietly. John went about his chores, but he kept an eye on her. She moved around the loft slowly, exploring the space, touching the hay and observing the animals from above. Each movement was careful, respectful, and deliberate. John realized that she was learning to feel safe in this new environment, gradually claiming a small piece of the farm as her own. Occasionally, she would glance at him, her eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and caution. John felt a deep respect for her. She had endured hardships that most people could never imagine, yet she had arrived at his farm with nothing but courage and resilience. Her presence was a reminder of the strength that could exist quietly, without fanfare or announcement. As the sun began to lower in the sky, John suggested a simple task, helping him gather firewood. She agreed, moving with him to the edge of the forest where fallen branches could be collected. Her movements were careful but efficient, and John noticed how she observed the surroundings, aware of every sound and shadow. It was clear she had learned to survive in the wilderness, reading the world with an instinct honed by experience. They returned to the barn with the collected wood, arranging it neatly near the stove. The act was simple, but it carried a sense of shared purpose. For the first time, John realized that this quiet woman who had entered his barn as a stranger was beginning to become part of the rhythm of life on the farm. She hadn't spoken much, but her actions spoke volumes. She was resilient, capable, and willing to trust in small, cautious steps. As evening approached, John prepared a light meal for her. She accepted it quietly, sitting on the hayloft and eating with careful, deliberate movements. Occasionally, her eyes met his, and he felt a subtle connection forming, a bond built on patience, trust, and mutual respect. He understood that this was only the beginning of a journey, not just for her, but for both of them. After dinner, John lit a small lantern in the barn. The soft glow illuminated her face, showing the contours of her expression, the strength, the caution, and the faint traces of a smile that had begun to appear more often. She seemed more relaxed than the previous night, though still watchful, as if learning that safety could exist without constant fear. John took a seat on the floor nearby, keeping a respectful distance. "You don't have to leave tonight," he said softly. "You can stay here as long as you want, you're safe." She nodded slowly, folding her hands in her lap. Her eyes closed briefly, and he could see her breathing slow. For a moment, the barn was filled with only the quiet sounds of the animals and the gentle hum of the night outside. It was a fragile peace, but it was enough for now. John stepped outside briefly to look at the stars. The world was vast, mysterious, and sometimes frightening, but he felt a strange sense of calm. The woman in his barn was more than a stranger. She was a symbol of courage, resilience, and the quiet power of trust. Her presence had changed the rhythm of his day, bringing a new awareness to the quiet life he had led for so long. When he returned to the barn, she was still seated on the hay, wrapped in the blanket he had provided, eyes half closed. John realized that tonight would be another night of vigilance and care, but it would also be another night of quiet connection. They were two lives crossing paths under unexpected circumstances, learning to navigate the unknown together. As he settled near the doorway, John reflected on how much had already happened in just a single day. The woman's presence had brought unease, curiosity, and admiration all at once. He didn't know her full story yet, and perhaps he never would, but he knew this. She had survived incredible challenges, and now, for the first time in a long while, she had found a place where she could rest. The barn, filled with the soft glow of the lantern and the faint sounds of the night, was no longer just a shelter for animals. It had become a refuge, a place where trust was slowly growing, and where two very different lives were beginning to intersect in a meaningful way. John knew that tomorrow would bring new questions, perhaps new challenges, but for tonight, it was enough to sit quietly, watch over her, and understand that even the smallest gestures of care could make a difference in someone's life. The next morning, John awoke to the soft glow of sunlight spilling into his farmhouse. The birds were singing, the wind whispered gently through the trees, and the farm was slowly coming alive. But his thoughts were not on the chores or the animals, they were on the woman in the barn. He wondered how she had slept, what she might be thinking, and whether she felt more at ease after the last 2 days. As he approached the barn, he noticed her already awake, seated on the hayloft. She was looking down at the animals below, observing their movement, and occasionally glancing at the soft beams of sunlight cutting through the barn windows. Her posture was more relaxed than before, though there was still a subtle wariness in her eyes. She had started to trust the space, the animals, and most importantly him, but cautiously, step by step. John greeted her gently, "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" She tilted her head slightly, considering him, then gave a small nod. Her eyes held a quiet determination, a sense of calm that came from surviving and enduring hardships beyond what most could imagine. John realized that each day brought small victories, trust gained, fear eased, and courage strengthened. After breakfast, John suggested they take a walk through the fields together. "It's a good way to get some fresh air and see the farm from a different perspective," he said. She nodded quietly, following him as he led the way along the path lined with tall grass and wildflowers. The sun was warm, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and pine. As they walked, John noticed how observant she was. She studied the land carefully, noticing details he had taken for granted: the direction of the sun, the growth of certain plants, and the tracks left by animals. Her movements were measured, deliberate, as if every step mattered. John felt a mixture of admiration and curiosity. She had clearly learned to navigate the world with care and awareness, a skill born of necessity and survival. They reached the edge of a small pond, where the water reflected the sky like a mirror. She paused, kneeling at the water's edge and touching it gently with her fingers. John watched quietly, understanding that this was more than just curiosity. She was connecting with the world around her, finding comfort in something simple, pure, and constant. "You like it here," John said softly, breaking the silence. She looked at him briefly, then back at the water. Her expression softened, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She didn't speak, but her eyes conveyed a sense of appreciation and quiet happiness. John understood. It was rare to find moments of peace, especially for someone who had spent so long in danger or uncertainty. After a while, they returned to the barn. John suggested small tasks to help her feel involved. She assisted with cleaning the barn, arranging tools, and feeding the animals. Each task was done carefully and with attention, showing not only competence but also a willingness to contribute to the shared space. John noticed that with each passing day, she became more confident, more comfortable in the rhythm of life on the farm. By afternoon, John decided to share a story from his own life. "When I was a boy," he began, "my father taught me how to care for the land, the animals, and the people around us. He always said that kindness and patience can change lives, even if we don't see it immediately." The woman listened quietly, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't interrupt, didn't question, just absorbed the words. John realized that she was learning not only about him but about the world she had entered, a world that was patient, kind, and steady. As the day passed, they worked together, shared small meals, and sat quietly in the loft, watching the animals below. The woman's silence was no longer tense. It was contemplative, peaceful, a sign that she was beginning to feel secure. John respected her need for space and independence, understanding that trust was built slowly, not forced. In the evening, John decided to light a fire outside near the barn. The warmth of the flames and the glow of the firelight created a comforting atmosphere. He invited her to sit nearby. At first she hesitated, remaining close to the barn door, but gradually she moved closer, drawn by the light and warmth. They sat together in silence, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. John noticed how her eyes reflected the flames, how she seemed to relax more fully in this shared moment. He realized that small gestures, light, warmth, presence, could communicate more than words ever could. After some time, he offered her a small blanket. She accepted it quietly, wrapping it around herself and leaning slightly closer to the fire. It was a simple act, but it symbolized trust and acceptance. She was beginning to feel that this place, this man, could offer safety and comfort, a rare gift for someone who had spent so long in uncertainty. As night fell, the sky was filled with stars. John and the woman sat side by side, watching the constellations and listening to the gentle night sounds of the farm. The wind whispered through the trees, and the animals settled for the night. There was a sense of calm, a fragile peace that hung in the air. John reflected on how far she had come in just a few days. From the moment she appeared in his barn, scared and cautious, to now, sitting calmly beside him, she had begun to trust, to rest, and to connect with the world around her. Her courage and resilience were inspiring, and John felt honored to witness her journey, even in this small corner of his life. The woman finally spoke a few words, soft and hesitant. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had used words to communicate directly with him. John smiled gently, understanding the weight of her words. They carried gratitude, acknowledgement, and a hint of relief. "You're welcome," he replied softly. "You've been very brave." She nodded slightly, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames of the fire. In that moment, John realized that the bond between them was no longer defined by fear or uncertainty. It was defined by trust, respect, and the quiet understanding that they had both found something meaningful in each other's presence. As the night deepened, John led her back to the barn loft, helping her settle among the hay. He placed the blanket carefully around her shoulders and ensured she was comfortable. She lay down quietly, her eyes closing slowly. For the first time, she seemed to rest without tension, without the constant vigilance that had marked her journey. John stayed nearby for a while, watching over her silently. He knew that her past would always be a part of her, and that trust could be fragile, easily broken by the wrong word or action. But tonight she had allowed herself to rest, to feel safe, and to accept the quiet comfort of another person's care. As he finally left the barn and stepped outside, the night sky stretched endlessly above him. The stars shone brightly, and the moon cast a gentle glow over the fields. John felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope. The woman had arrived in his life unexpectedly, bringing with her lessons of courage, resilience, and the quiet power of trust. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and questions, but for tonight, it was enough to witness her finding a moment of peace. The barn, once a place of work and solitude, had become a refuge, a space where trust could grow, and where a stranger had begun to feel at home. John returned to his farmhouse, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the resilience of the human spirit, the power of small gestures, and the ways in which connection could be forged even in the most unexpected circumstances. The woman in his barn had begun a journey of healing and trust, and John felt privileged to be part of it. As he lay in bed that night, John realized that life had a way of surprising people, bringing unexpected encounters that could change the course of days, weeks, and even years. He did not yet know her full story, and perhaps he never would, but he knew that her presence had already made a lasting impact on his life. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of animals, and the quiet whisper of the world settling into rest. Inside the barn, the woman slept peacefully for the first time in days, surrounded by the safety and warmth that John had offered. It was a small, fragile piece, but it was real, and it was enough. John smiled quietly to himself, feeling a sense of fulfillment and connection. He knew that the days ahead would continue to test their patience, trust, and courage. But for now, the barn was a sanctuary. It was a place where fear could soften, where trust could grow, and where two lives, so different and yet so connected, could share the quiet strength of human resilience. The next morning, the farm felt calm and quiet, the sunlight spilling gently across the fields. John had started his day as usual, feeding the animals and checking the fences, but his thoughts were on the woman in his barn. Over the past days, he had watched her grow more confident, more comfortable in this new space. She had moved from fear and uncertainty to a tentative sense of trust. Yet John knew that trust was delicate, and the journey was far from over. When he approached the barn, he saw her standing near the loft window, gazing at the horizon. She moved with purpose now, her posture stronger, her movements deliberate. It was clear she had begun to feel the stability of this place. John called softly, "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" She turned, offering a small, shy smile. It was not the faint, hesitant expression of the first day. It was a quiet acknowledgement that she was beginning to accept this place as safe. John felt a wave of relief and admiration. Her courage had carried her here, but it was her willingness to open herself slowly to trust that had truly impressed him. After breakfast, John suggested they take a walk along the edge of the farm, beyond the usual paths. "I want to show you something," he said. She followed, her movements careful but confident. The woman's curiosity was visible now, mingled with a sense of quiet joy at being outdoors without fear. They reached a small grove of trees, where the sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the ground. Birds chirped overhead, and the air smelled of pine and fresh earth. John sat on a fallen log, inviting her to join him. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside him. For a while, neither spoke. They simply listened to the sounds of the forest, feeling the rhythm of life around them. Finally, John spoke. "You've been through so much, and I can't imagine what it must have been like. But I want you to know that you don't have to face anything alone here. This place is safe, and you are welcome." The woman looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunlight and the depth of her emotions. Slowly, she nodded. For the first time, she seemed to accept not only the safety of the place, but also the kindness of another person. John realized that this acceptance was a turning point. Trust had grown, fragile but real, and it was a step toward healing. Over the next few hours, they returned to the barn. John offered small tasks to keep her engaged, arranging tools, feeding the animals, and cleaning sections of the barn. Each task was performed with care, and John noticed how her confidence had grown. She moved with purpose, her hands steady, her eyes calm. She no longer flinched at every sound or shadow. She had begun to reclaim a sense of normalcy in her life. By midday, they sat together for a simple meal. The woman ate slowly, savoring each bite. Occasionally, her eyes met John's, and he felt a silent connection forming, a bond built not on words but on shared understanding, patience, and respect. He realized that the moments of quiet and small gestures of care had done more than words could achieve. They had begun to heal a part of her spirit that had been wounded by the world outside. In the afternoon, John suggested they explore the nearby hills. "It's peaceful up there," he said. "You can see the whole farm and the land beyond." She hesitated, looking at the path, then slowly nodded. Together they walked, the woman moving confidently now, her steps sure and deliberate. John noticed her curiosity, the way she observed the wildflowers, the tracks of small animals, and the gentle sway of the trees in the breeze. At the top of the hill, they paused. The view stretched for miles, the farm below, the forest beyond, and the distant hills fading into the horizon. The woman stood quietly, taking it all in. John could see the wonder and the peace in her eyes, a rare moment of stillness for someone who had spent so long in survival mode. He realized that she was beginning to experience life differently, with a sense of presence and safety she had not known for a long time. As they descended the hill, John spoke softly. "I know you've had to be strong all your life, but strength isn't just about surviving, it's about allowing yourself to rest, to trust, and to feel safe. I hope this place can help you do that." The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him with a quiet intensity, as if absorbing every word. Slowly, she nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning. She was beginning to believe, even if just a little, that safety and trust could exist in the world. Back at the barn, John prepared a light evening meal. The woman accepted it quietly, eating with care, occasionally glancing at him with curiosity and subtle appreciation. John could sense that she was learning more about him, not just the man who owned the farm, but the person who had shown her patience, kindness, and respect without demanding anything in return. After the meal, John lit a small fire outside the barn. The warmth and glow created a comforting atmosphere. He invited her to sit nearby. At first, she hesitated, staying close to the barn door, but gradually she moved closer to the fire. John noticed how her eyes reflected the flames, how she seemed to relax in this shared space. The firelight highlighted her features, the quiet strength, the resilience, and the subtle softness that had begun to emerge. They sat together, listening to the gentle sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of animals, and the soft whisper of the wind. John realized that these small, quiet moments were as important as any words or actions. They were building a foundation of trust, understanding, and shared humanity. Finally, she spoke softly, her voice hesitant but clear. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time she had offered words of gratitude directly, and John felt the weight of their significance. It was not just thanks for food or shelter. It was recognition of the care, patience, and trust he had offered without expectation. "You're welcome," he replied gently. "You've been very brave, and I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you need." She nodded slowly, her eyes closing briefly as she absorbed his words. John could see the relief and comfort in her expression. She had found a place where she could rest, feel safe, and begin to rebuild a sense of security that had been missing for so long. As the night deepened, John helped her settle in the loft of the barn. He placed a blanket around her shoulders and made sure she was comfortable among the hay. She lay down quietly, her breathing even and calm. For the first time in days, she seemed to rest without tension, without fear, and without the constant vigilance that had defined her recent life. John stayed nearby for a while, watching over her silently. He reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the hardships, and the courage it had taken to survive. He realized that her presence had not only changed her life, but had also touched his own in ways he had not anticipated. He had learned patience, empathy, and the quiet power of offering trust and care without expectation. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, filled with stars. The farm was peaceful, the animals settled, and the wind whispered gently through the trees. John felt a deep sense of gratitude. The woman in his barn had brought with her lessons of resilience, courage, and the subtle beauty of human connection. She had entered his life unexpectedly, and in doing so had reminded him of the importance of kindness and patience. As he returned to his farmhouse, John reflected on the past days. From the moment she appeared at his barn, scared and cautious, to now, resting peacefully and beginning to trust, the journey had been remarkable. He did not yet know her full story, and perhaps he never would, but he knew that her presence had already left a lasting impact on him. The next morning, John prepared a simple breakfast and placed it near the loft. She accepted it quietly, her eyes meeting his with a small, genuine smile. It was a smile of trust, of recognition, and of the first real peace she had felt in a long time. John realized that these small gestures, food, warmth, presence, and patience, had done more than anything else could. They had helped her reclaim a sense of safety and hope. Over the following days, they continued their routine. She helped with chores, tended to the animals, and began to speak in small, deliberate phrases. Words were few, but each one carried meaning. She shared fragments of her story, her struggles, her journey, her moments of fear, and John listened without judgment, offering support, understanding, and patience. Slowly, the woman began to rebuild her sense of self. She learned to trust the farm, the animals, and John. She laughed softly at small moments of joy, observed the beauty of the land with quiet wonder, and began to experience life without the constant shadow of fear. John watched, amazed at her resilience and courage, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing he had played a part in her journey. Eventually, it came time for her to consider the next step. John helped her make plans to reach a nearby safe place, someone who could provide support beyond the farm. The day of her departure was quiet and unspoken, filled with mutual respect and understanding. She gave John a small, sincere smile, a gesture of gratitude, trust, and connection. As she walked toward the horizon, John felt a mixture of sadness and hope. She had entered his barn as a stranger, weary and cautious, and was leaving with confidence, trust, and a renewed sense of life. The barn was quieter now, but it carried the memory of her presence, the courage, resilience, and trust that had grown in those few days. John returned to his daily life, but he often glanced toward the horizon, thinking of the woman who had entered his barn and changed both their lives. He realized that life was full of unexpected encounters, moments that could alter one's perspective, and that even the smallest gestures of care and patience could leave lasting impacts. The barn, once just a place for work and animals, had become a symbol of trust, resilience, and human connection. And John knew that, no matter what, the memory of those days, the lessons learned, and the bond formed would remain with him forever.